Good evening, faculty and staff. My name is Naja Tinsley, and I am your literacy coach. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Fountas and Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System, also known as BAS. This is the assessment system that we'll be using to progress monitor our students throughout the year to make sure that they're making that needed growth. So this system was created by Irene Fountas and Gaysu Pinnell, the same two ladies who created the system for our LLI, what we use in intervention. So with this assessment, it's one-on-one and it's a comprehensive assessment that's used to determine the reading level of our students. It determines the instructional reading level, and it also determines that independent reading level that they are on. So again, it's used for, as you can see here, the instructional level, but also that independent level. But it also gives you that frustrational level, that level that says that that book is not a just right book for that kid, that might be that someday book for that child. This system is intended for all of us educators who want a closer look at our child to see what they're doing as readers, what they're doing well, and what are some areas that they're struggling with. So it's for us as educators to monitor our students, but it's also for students to be able to see that this is the progress that they're making as well, and also to point out to them that these are some of the great strategies that you're using, and to point out these are some other strategies that you can try in order to help grow yourself as a reader. So I want to be clear that this is not a form of intervention. Again, the intervention that we use within our school will be the LLI system. So please do not get these two systems mixed up. Homeroom teachers, core classroom teachers will be using this Fountas and Pinnell system, and our interventionists will be using the LLI system. Same company, different purposes though. So this is not a form of instruction, it's a form of assessment. It's a resource that you can use to guide your classroom instruction. It's a resource to provide you with information on where your child is as a reader and what your child is doing well as a reader. This is also intended for all students. It's intended for students who are reading on grade level, reading above grade level, reading below grade level. This is for all students so that we as educators can progress monitor. So the first thing I think that you should know is that there are two systems. There's what we call the System 1, which is for grades K through 2, and then there's System 2, which is for grades 3 through 8. Obviously, our early childhood teachers are going to be using System 1, and our upper grades are going to be using System 2. Both of these systems are very similar. There are more books to choose from in the System 2, but in both of these, you will find the books that you need, and for each level, there is a fiction and a nonfiction book. You'll find also in there the assessment guide. You will also find videos and subscriptions and all those things, but please don't stress about the guidelines and the videos and professional development. If you want to take the time to look at those are great, but I promise you I will take the time to train you in the ways that you need in order to use the system. So again, as stated, there's System 1 and there's System 2. Same things within the boxes, just catered towards that grade level. So how do you effectively use this? This is conducted one-on-one. This is very similar to how we do conferences with our students. This is a one-on-one basis. It's not meant to be small group. It's meant to be a one-on-one session. It will be done 3 times a year, just like DRA. So it's beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year. And there are 3 parts to this session. To this assessment. So part 1 is reading. Part 2 is conversation. And part 3 is a writing part of the assessment. These all assess the students in different ways, but these are all very valuable and insightful parts of the assessment. So let's get started. In part 1, what you'll do is you'll read with the student. There are 2 books for each level. One's a fiction, one's a nonfiction. My suggestion is to let the student choose. So you choose the level for the child, and you can determine that by looking in their file to see where were they at the end of last year. So once you figured out where they were at the end of last year, you can then use that to guide where you want to start. So once you've already decided what level that child needs to start on, then I suggest that you let that child choose whether they want to do a fiction or nonfiction. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. We all have our likes and dislikes. And we know that allowing a child to choose what they're going to feel most comfortable with, whether that be a fiction or nonfiction, is going to be extremely helpful when doing these assessments. So once a child has decided what book they want to do, then you will open up and start reading. So, as that child is reading to you, what you're going to be doing is looking at this paper that's in front of you. And it's basically just a printout of exactly what that child is already reading. And so, as that child is reading, what you want to do is make sure you're being super attentive to the miscues that he or she is making, what self corrections they're making, any substitutions that they're making. Are they reading through punctuation? Are they doing any wonderful strategies like looking at pictures to decode words or going back to reread to make sense of things? So you want to take note of all of that. You're going to go through each page with the child as the child is reading. So once that's done, then once you've done the complete assessment with the child, we will start marking how many times they self-corrected, how many errors he or she made. So please don't worry about that part until the end of the assessment. You want to make sure that you catch everything and you're not trying to count as you go. Now, there's many reasons that I appreciate the Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment system. One is that it actually has kids have books in their hands to read, which is natural. Instead of giving them a passage that's on paper, like reading A to Z tends to do for the upper grade levels. So, but another part of the Fountas and Pinnell assessment that I really appreciate is part 2, which is the conversation part of the assessment. So with this, the kids are asked questions about the text, but they're not questions that are superficial that we tend to find with DRA and reading A to Z. Questions that have them fill in the bubble for the correct answer, or questions that where the teacher's prompted to ask, who's the main character? How do you know? Or questions like, questions like, what's the problem in the story? How is the problem solved? Those are very basic, superficial questions, and what Fountas and Pinnell does is it asks kids to think on a much, much deeper level. So with this passage, you'll see that the teacher's prompted to ask the kids, what did you learn in this part of the book? So this is very open-ended, but what it requires is for the kid to think about what he or she has read and then determine what parts they want to share, what parts they deem most important. With this, the teacher's able to see, what is this child pulling from the text? Is this child pulling facts or superficial information? Or is this child using this book to go much more in depth and make connections and make inferences? So I like this because it gives the teachers prompts to help them guide their kids' answers and thinking. But it also is open-ended enough that it allows for them to get authentic answers and answers that are much more meaningful. So with the grading rubric that you'll see on the right, you'll see that students get higher scoring when they do make inferences and when they do make predictions and when they are actually engaging with the text instead of doing basic recall. So I really do appreciate that portion about this assessment. We will go in depth more about the rubric when we do grade level training. So sometime next week, what I'll do is I'll schedule with your team leaders a good time to come in where we can actually listen to a child and actually do a running record together and actually do, you can hear a teacher do the conversation part 2 with the kid. So, but that'll be at a later date, so don't stress about the rubric. I will explain that in much more detail next time. So part 3 is optional, and it's basically a writing portion, but I do think that this is the highest level to get our kids thinking, and I do recommend doing part 3. So with part 3, you don't have to read the question to the child. It's there for them. So maybe you have the child that you were just working with go off and write, and when they're done, they can put it on your desk or, put it in a safe place where you're going to be able to take it up. But while you sent that child off to respond to the writing prompt, what you can do is then pull another child for one-on-one and start that part 1 of the assessment. I think that this would be a great time saver. But I appreciate part 3 because, again, it requires kids to think on a higher level. And not only are they thinking about the text, but they've now got to be able to put that thinking into writing. which takes a lot of effort. So from this assessment, what you'll be able to learn is your student's instructional level and your student's independent reading level. We know that that instructional level is so very, very important when it comes to planning activities within the classroom. And this does a wonderful job of helping you see where that child is and with guiding your instructions for that child, small group and whole group. But the wonderful thing too is that the outcome, you also get that independent level, which tells you what would be a just right book for your child, or that frustration level, what would be a someday book for your child. So with this assessment, what we want it to do is drive our instruction. Let it help us drive our instruction. We're going to let it help us help our children. So what we're doing is we're observing the reading, writing, language behavior that the kids are using within this benchmark assessment system. And then we're then making inferences about our children. What are they doing well? Is your child, or the child that you're assessing, is he or she doing a wonderful job of decoding words and using the context of the sentence to help him or her figure out that word? Or are they using picture cues to help decode? Is that child reading fluently and with emotion? Is that child stopping and thinking as he or she is reading? Or are they reading through punctuation? What is this child doing really well, and what is this child struggling with? I can take those things and build upon them when I know. So once I know, I can prioritize and I can begin to teach and support that child. And then this just continues to go around and around and around, because we're assessing and observing, and then we're inferring, and then we're teaching to that. And then we're going back to do the same thing, because once we went through this cycle, that child is continuing to make growth. So then we have to move ourselves up to meet that child where he or she is, and we just continue to do this over and over and over, because it just helps that child grow. So you'll see here, one of the classroom uses that I really appreciate is that in this assessment kit, it comes with this comparison chart where we can compare across assessments, because we know that there's a plethora of assessments out there. And for kids that are new to our school or new to our district, it's nice to be able to know where they were before they came, and then compare that to where we need to start within this benchmark assessment system. Some other classroom uses that this can provide for us is, we already know that it provides that instructional reading level. And so that definitely helps with our guided reading groups or our literature circles and what we're doing within the classroom as far as small groups. So I appreciate that instructional level to help us when we're pulling groups or putting groups together for what it is that we want our kids to try or experience next. But that independent reading level too also really helps when it comes to helping kids choose just right books. We know about what level they would be on, so it makes it easier when we're going to to the library to check out books, and even when they're checking out books within our classroom library, to say, okay, so I know that this child is about an M, so these type of books would be good for the kids. Now, one thing we don't want to do is say, oh, this child is an M, so this child only needs to pull these kind of books, because it's important for kids to have lots of different books. Just Right books are wonderful books for sure, because it allows kids to grow as readers, but kids also need choice books, and those choice books might be easy peasy books. Those choice books might be someday books that the kids will be able to read someday. They're not quite there as readers yet, but someday they'll be able to read them. So that instructional and independent reading level that we're able to gain from this assessment really does help us within the classroom. Now, as far as parent communication, that instructional level is great because it says, oh, this is where your child is compared to the average child within that grade level. But more importantly, what it shows the parents is that this is where your child is as a reader. These are the type of books that your child is able to comfortably read and comprehend as a reader. So at home, these are probably the type of books that you also want to have handy for your child to read as well. Parents also like to see that growth over time too. So I think it's super important that as we're going through this system from year to year, this assessment, from year to year, that we're making sure that we're keeping track of where our kids were at the beginning, where our kids were in the middle, and where they were at the end. And over the course of 6 years from kindergarten to fifth, parents will definitely be able to see a continuous growth. So that's amazing to have. And I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but these assessment kits do, excuse me, provide folders for us to keep the work of the kids in so that it can be passed from grade level to grade level, from teacher to teacher as well. Another resource that I found super helpful was this continuum of literacy learning, which is part of the Fountas and Pinnell kit. And there will be one of these books in each of your team leaders' rooms. So if you want to read up a little bit more about the system, then definitely go to your team leader and ask for this book, because it's actually a really, really good resource to have handy. So let's talk honestly. Let's weigh it out. So there are many more pros than there are cons. It's easy to administer. Once you've done it a few times, it just becomes supernatural, and it flows. It uses real tangible books, which is so important. I can't stress enough how important it is for a child to have a book in his or her hand when they're reading in the classroom, but also when they're being assessed, because we don't want our assessments to look different from what real reading looks like. Everything you need is in the box. There's nothing else that we're going to have to go out and get. Everything we need is there. And like I said earlier, there are some CDs in there in case people want some extra professional development, or to like get a little bit more information or dive a little bit deeper into the assessment system. But again, I will do another session next week with you and your teammates to just help you become more acquainted with the system. The only cons that I could find were that that's one copy of each book, so there's not multiple copies like we get with DRA and Reading A to Z. But still, the con is the pro. Excuse me. The pro is that we get to have real, tangible books. The comprehension questions are subjectively scored, but who better to subjectively score our students than ourselves? We know our students as readers, and I think that we're very capable of making good judgment choices as they're giving us answers. The recording sheets don't leave much room for notes, but when I'm giving these assessments, that blank space after the sentence has ended, I am writing notes there, or you can always have a notebook paper beside you taking notes as well. But it does get a little bit hard to go from one paper to the next. So I'm super excited about this system, guys, and I know that it's going to be exactly what we need to get our school where it needs to be, but more importantly, to help our students grow and succeed. So I'm excited about this. I hope you guys are excited, and I'm really looking forward to our next professional development on this next week during team meetings. Thank you.